my presentation is going to be one where I talk about my family rather than about, so you got a very good backdrop as to what was taking place at that time amongst the Sindhi Hindu Indian diaspora. And we'll come back to some of the questions perhaps. So I like to start my timer so I don't go over. I wrote a blog post in response to a Namaste Wahala, the movie, the Netflix Niger movie that recently came out. And my aim of that blog post was to shift the focus away from the fantasy of happy endings, where at the end, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, set in Nigeria and made by a Sindhi Indian Nigerian filmmaker who is also a woman. What's interesting is that at the end, the Indian boy, Raj, falls in love with Didi, a Nigerian girl, and in the end, the families reconcile and get over their basically the hesitance of this kind of interracial, international, perhaps even inter-religious marriage. So there's a happy ending. My point of that post was to explore how things like social class, caste, race matter in West African Indian relationships. My focus today will be more specifically on the case of my own Sindhi family in the Gold Coast, then Ghana. It's important to note that the Sindhis were in the African continent even before they identified as Indian. So they were Sindhi first because they came from Sindh before the formation of the nation state that we now call India. It is also important to note that the Sindhis are a diasporic business community, and my father's family, their presence in the Gold Coast and in West Africa more broadly spans about 6 generations and of course about 130 years, starting in Sindh, Hyderabad. So just to let you know, that picture right there, my grandfather is the person on the left. His name is Victor. You know, they changed their names from the names that they were given. So his real name is actually Vasiomal. He changed it to Victor.
The photo cannot be seen.
Sorry?
The photograph cannot be seen.
You can't see my
Can
slide?
you reshare your screen again? I think some people can see it and some can't.
Okay, I'll reshare my screen. Sorry about that. Share screen. Can you see it now?
Yes, perfect. I can. I think everybody can too.
Well, I mean, you have to see my good-looking grandfather on the left. If you don't see that, then there's no point in me even giving this presentation, because he was known for those few things, his looks and his hospitality. So everyone good, right? Good. So the person on the left is my grandfather, and you see he was playing that mediating role that Tracy so well spoke about, that these Sindhi trade diasporas were also mediating relationships between Gold Coasters, later Ghanaians, and the larger Indian business community. The woman on the right is actually a diplomat from India coming to the Gold Coast, and my grandfather served as a mediator between the diplomat and the Gold Coast community. So let's start with the presence of Sindhis. They came all the way from Sindh, which is, if you look at the map, I'm sure you can tell where South Asia and where West Africa is. They started off there, and this is how their journey would have looked like in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And don't forget, a lot of these trade routes are also linked to the British Raj, the British Empire, the Suez Canal, and trade ports that were linked to the British Empire. So they will start off in this point called Hyderabad, which is now in Pakistan. And this is pre-partition. We have to remember that the Sindhis in West Africa is entangled with the history of the British Empire, more particularly the British colonial rule from 1843 to 1947. So while Sindh had been a very important node in the Indian Ocean trade network several centuries before the British came, the annexation encouraged Hindu traders of the Hyderabad region to look for alternative markets for goods that were traditionally made locally, for also the Muslim rulers who were there at the time. And so they were already part of the global networks, but the British presence really pushed them into these global networks in a way that was not the same before. And so I won't talk to you about all these different networks, but I want to talk about the few different movements. So one was pre-partition 1947 and post-partition, and how these different migratory movements are significant for the way in which Sindhis in Ghana think about home. That's a picture of Sindh in the 1890s when my great-grandparents and my grandfather, grandmother were most probably living in a place that resembled that. It's from the 1890s. And they eventually landed up in many ports in Ghana, including Cape Coast, Takoradi, but eventually they made their home in Kumasi, which is the heart of the Ashanti Kingdom. That is a picture of my great-grandfather on the left, the Chalaram Tarachan Daswani, and to the right is his wife. On the left of those three women, Aheti Daswani with her two sisters seated next to her. What's interesting is that the men would leave Sindh and go and do their business in these destinations. It was only after partition that the women actually came and joined them, and the families came with the women with their children. And when the children were raised in these countries where these trade relationships had been built. So the presence of a Ghanaian Sindhi diaspora or a Ghanaian Sindhi really started after partition. So it was in 1990 that I met my great-grandfather. So my great-grandfather's father and his brothers were the first to go to the Gold Coast in 1919. And my grandfather, Victor, was one of the first Sindhis to become a Ghanaian citizen. So my great-grandparents retired in India, in Madras. So this story is really about, just to show you a few more pictures, that is Bombay Bazaar, which was in the 1920s Gold Coast that I believe was started by, and it says here, Tarachan Majasumal Daswani, my great-great-grandfather, and his brother. As all family businesses in the Sindhi network, they tend to split up. So once you start a business, over some time, brothers tend to disagree and they split up. Sons tend to disagree and they split up. And this is what happened as well. So my great-great-grandfather and my grandfather were in Kumasi, where eventually what was Bombay Bazaar became Babu Bazaar. And what was Babu Bazaar, if you look at the signage below, became Vic Babu's Cafe, which was a very popular cafe destination for tourists and local Ghanaians looking for Western as well as Chinese food. So this is like in a center of what you will call a Prempeh Avenue in Kumasi. So this story is also about how my grandfather and his family were kind of basically intermediaries between the Ashanti royalty as well as the Ghanaian government and the Indian Sindhi trade diaspora. This is the Ashanti Hini, former Ashanti Hini Prempeh I, with his wife, and my grandmother on the left, Mohini, and my grandfather on the right. And his friendships with these different kings of Ashanti, as well as with the ministers in government, allowed him to become a citizen and allowed him to stay in Ghana and make Ghana his home. And it's important where social class and a certain kind of role as a business person, as well as his definitely overt attempts to build these relationships and to receive and exchange gifts and interactions, created this ability to remain in Ghana. And my grandfather at the end told me that Ghana was his home, not India. This is important because He held a Ghanaian passport like many Sindhis who live in Ghana and in Nigeria. They hold also Nigerian passports, but a lot of them returned to India, like my great-granduncle, who I'll speak about next. My grandfather was basically adamant that his networks were so deep in Ghana that he could not see himself going to return to a place that he didn't have many strong memories of. This is his family. So my grandfather's on the right. On the left, extreme left, is Jackie, his second brother. The one in the middle is Babu, and the woman with them is their sister Lavina. What's interesting about this picture is that they started this business together. They were in Kumasi together, and they all went their own separate ways. So Jackie went to Cameroon, where he had his in-laws, and he lived there. Babu went to Accra, where he started his own business, and my grandfather stayed in Kumasi. Lavina ended up in Singapore, where her husband, who was born in China, was based. They eventually moved to Lagos, Nigeria, after their business in Singapore did not succeed. But this is how these trade networks were actually more connected than perhaps some would imagine. What's interesting, I don't want to tell the story of my grandfather today, but I have about 5 minutes to tell you a story of my uncle Babu. Because Babu's story, and he is on the right over here, is an interesting one. When he was 6 years old in 1947, during the partition, he recalls being shoved through the window of a train, leaving to cross the border to India. He was with his mother and his aunts. So don't forget, the role of women is somehow silenced in these stories and in these pictures too. But the women were central to taking care of the children, but also to moving and safeguarding valuables and family members. It was men who were the face of these families, but not necessarily the ones who held these families together. So they moved to South India, Madras, where they built a new home. He went to school, and he was determined to study economics in London. He passed through the Gold Coast at the time, saw his two brothers. They made him stay. He said to me he fell in love with Accra. The people were friendly, and it was a very nice community of Sindhis there. By the time he split up with his brothers, when Jackie had moved to Cameroon, Jackie is the one on the extreme left in the picture. He started his own company near Tesano in current day Accra. He talks about how his Sindhi friends and his Ghanaian friends both financially supported him because he didn't have very much to start with. What's important that he recalls that being in Ghana was also linked to his networks, to the Rotary Club, to the Freemasons and the Indian Merchants Association. As like my grandfather, these connections allowed him to meet ministers, former presidents, and people who kept them held into the social moral fabric of Ghana. But then during different military regimes, especially during the time of John Rawlings, the military confiscated all his valuables. He described himself as being tied up by soldiers to a tree while they ransacked his home, stole things from his factory. He was not alone in this. Many people were targeted, many businesses were targeted. He also had later on his cargo stolen by soldiers. He was extorted out of money by someone he knew. He eventually moved back to Pune to retire. He's there right now in Pune, in India, where he's retired. Now, this story is a story, and I have about maybe 2 minutes to end here, but the story is one that I've shared with you because I really wanted to approach my methodology as one where I speak about not just what we read about, but what we don't read about. And I can tell these stories partly because as much as I belong to the Sindhi diaspora, I don't identify primarily as only a Sindhi. And in telling these stories and writing about these things, trust me, my family does not always like it because it actually disturbs a certain face or understanding of what the Indian or the Sindhi diaspora should look like. The question is, what about cross-racial marriages, interracial marriages. My father's married to a Ghanaian. It didn't go down so well. My cousin, who is my father's brother's son in Ghana, is married to a half Ghanaian, what you call a half caste, but a mixed, racially mixed person of Ghanaian and a European heritage. But what you find there is that this only takes place when social class matters less, or if the person who they are marrying is a Ghanaian, then social class and wealth matter. I can talk about this if we have time later, but my methodology is an act of disobedience and a rebellion, in a way that what I write about doesn't always align with what we think about when we talk about the continuities of this diasporic presence in Ghana, the Sindhi diasporic presence in Ghana. It's a lot more complicated.